know that this will take the full hour, so we'll see how far what we get through, but if it doesn't, that's probably a good thing too. So, okay, today's agenda, today's presentation and some of the goals that we're going to do for today are to understand the definition of sexual harassment. And I'm sure if I went around the room and asked everybody what sexual harassment is, you all probably have a pretty good idea of what sexual harassment is. But we'll define it a little bit more with what the courts define as being sexual harassment. Recognizing actions that could be considered sexual harassment, applying skills to prevent and stop it, understand the process of what we do internally for the heritage investigations when they happen, and what a supervisor's and employee's responsibilities are. The supervisors, and I know we have some in the room, have a lot more responsibility when it comes to acting on investigations, so we just want to make mention to that. We will talk a little bit about workplace bullies and office gossip, and then review our current sexual harassment policy and procedure. So to get into what is sexual harassment, it is defined as unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other nonverbal, verbal, or physical conduct of a sexual nature. There's some key phrases that are in here that we'll talk about quite often because the unwelcome is really a big part of what constitutes sexual harassment. Sexual harassment causes harm to the victim and has a negative impact on the work environment, and we'll talk more about what types of impacts that can be. So what are some sexual nature conduct? Conduct of a sexual nature includes a wide range of behaviors. Now, I read a lot of stuff before I came here today, just to try to change it up a little bit from what we've done in years past. And there are a lot of different talks about, and I know we've stood up here in the past and said, no joking, no flirting, no this, no that. In fact, we've said, don't even put your hands on somebody. That is a really, really good rule of thumb to follow, just because you don't know when someone's going to take it and be offended by what you do. However, what the courts really look at are really some offensive, vulgar type harassment, and that's usually what takes it to the court system. But we at Heritage would prefer to have a little bit less of that type of atmosphere, because what will happen if you start joking and doing things is it can escalate to something a little bit more. So that's where you really have to be careful. Behaviors that may appear relatively innocent, like the joking, the flirting, can constitute a conduct of sexual nature. Some behaviors are so offensive that the first time it occurs, it's considered sexual harassment. So they really look at the severity of a case, and obviously someone really physically touching somebody or doing something aggressively with them of a sexual nature is going to be more severe than the joking or the flirting or something like that. Other behaviors must be repeated over and over. Whether a behavior is considered sexual harassment really depends on whether the behavior is unwelcome. And again, that unwelcome term is a big part of what it is. If it's a consensual relationship, it's not, you can't claim harassment on it. If you're consenting to a relationship, it's not harassment. It has to be unwelcome. And it meets the following criteria. Really what the courts look at, and this is a lot of geared towards laws and regulations in the courts. So when you read this stuff, it might be a little different, like I said, with what Heritage would like to see within the facilities. But what they say is the action is related to sex or sexual conduct. They're ruling really on sexual conduct. They also now have taken it, because sexual harassment started with Title VII Act, which was in 1991. But basically Title VII is discrimination of race, creed, color, religion, sex, national origin, sexual orientation, things like that. So if there is discrimination based on gender, that could also be a harassment situation. If there is harassment based on religion, that can also be a harassment that will take it to the courts. Most of the time it's sexual conduct, but there is other types of harassment that will be considered discriminatory, and that's the Title VII Act. The conduct is unwelcome, not returned, not consensual or initiated, like we said, and it affects the condition of employment or has a negative impact on the work environment. So behavior is unwelcome. Now, I think you pretty much can tell if someone wants you to touch them or not. For the most part, their body language, I would think, would give it away. But here's it's unwelcome when they do not solicit or initiate the conduct. An employee regards conduct as undesirable and offensive, and they use the body language to express objection, pulling away, things like that. Be aware of the contact or the body language. I mentioned in orientation, and I know several of you have been here for a while, so you probably haven't heard this, but Several years ago, we did have a case of it was actually a resident's family member who would come in, and he was harassing a couple of the women on the unit. But what he would do was, he never said anything verbally, he never touched them, but he would get in between that space that you like to have, that you feel comfortable when you're talking to someone. And he would get really close to them. And it made them very, very, very uncomfortable to what he was going to do, or they'd see him coming and they wouldn't want to be around, or there was just a lot of unease when he was there. So they never said anything, actually. It took someone else who knew that they were feeling like this to come forward and say, we think there could be a problem, this gentleman shouldn't do this. Now, was it a harassment? Did he mean to? He says he didn't. And we explained that that's just not appropriate. Be aware that it's making them uncomfortable. But they filed it under this harassment investigation form because, or the person that came forward on their behalf said, I think this is harassment, and we took it to that type of complaint because he didn't sense that that was a problem between them. But in all reality, you need to be aware and look at what type of body language. And I'm guessing that those two ladies that was happening to did sort of back away a little bit when he was doing that. So be aware of that kind of thing. Some offenders are unaware how actions are perceived. Others are insensitive to reactions. When a person is very clear, this is something to keep in mind, because if someone says that it's unwelcome or offensive to them, make sure you listen to that, because if you keep doing it, you can't explain the behavior. You can't say, oh, I didn't realize, because they were pretty clear in saying this is unwelcome, this is not something that I want to have happen. So obviously, if someone says that, stay away, don't do anything further. Remember, an employee may not actively object to a particular conduct and feel comfortable voicing their objections. In our current policy, it does talk about the first place to start if you are feeling like you're at all harassed is with the person that you're alleging is harassing you. If you're comfortable to go to them and say, you're offending me, or please stop, or I'm not interested in whatever they're offering, try to work it out between you. If you're not comfortable, though, that does not mean it's still, you don't have to. There are several times, I'm guessing, where people might not feel comfortable to go voice their concerns. But even if they don't then, they might even appear to go along. That does not mean that it's consensual or sexual harassment did not occur. We also had a situation, and I'm going to give actual real-life sort of situations within Heritage as I do this, because I think it's appropriate. I'm not going to give names, but I do think it's appropriate to hear. And for all of you in nursing, you know how when you come in, you give and get report, and you talk about what's going on in the previous shift with the nursing, with the residents. We did have a particular person that when that report was given, that they felt that was their opportune time, because everybody had to be there and you all listened to what was going on the unit, that was their particular time to share personal stories of their sex life, or what happened with their husband, or this and that. And of course, the staff, because this was somebody in sort of a supervisory role, the staff didn't want to say anything because they felt, it's my supervisor, I can't say anything. So they actually just kind of went along with it. Didn't share their stories or didn't say anything, but went along with it until the point where a bunch of them came forward and said, this is inappropriate, offensive behavior. And there are several of us that are very offended by this type of discussion. So just because that they don't seem to be offended doesn't mean that it's appropriate. You still need to be careful of what you're saying or who you're saying things to. Severity and frequency of sexual harassment. We talked a little bit about the severity. A single incident might be serious enough to constitute a sexual harassment case. Others, depending on what it is, may take more times to have happen I mean, if somebody comes to you and asks you for a date or asks you for something or whatever it may be, and you say, no, I'm not interested, and then they stop, well, it's not really harassment because they took the cue from you that you weren't interested and they walked away. But if they kept doing it over and over and over and over again and repeated actions like that, then it would be considered possibly harassment. Types of sexual harassment. This is just, again, same thing we go over every year, because there are two types of sexual harassment. The first one is called quid pro quo. That's a Latin term. That's something for something. And the harasser in these type of situations, this is pretty black and white because the harasser is usually or has to be somebody who has the authority. So it's usually the supervisor or a supervisor because they can give you something for something, or they'll take something away if you don't do something. So if they want a sexual favor or if they want something from you, they'll give you the promotion or they'll give you the raise or they'll give you something in return for whatever it is that they're looking for. So it's pretty black and white. I mean, it's a misuse of authority and power, and definitely a one-time incident could result in harassment because it's usually pretty severe. Those are not the cases that we get. I mean, honestly, those are pretty black and white, like I said, and we don't get those type of cases. What we typically see here are the things that are called hostile work environment. This occurs when an employee is subjected to comments of a sexual nature, offensive sexual materials, or unwelcome physical conduct. Generally speaking, a single incident will not be considered a hostile work environment. This is where it's not usually, that's why it's more gray, because to some people it might not be offensive, to others it might be. It has to be an ongoing thing as well. The intent of a person's behavior may not be relevant in determining if behavior is sexual harassment. What matters is the impact of the behavior that it has on the workplace. Even if someone doesn't intend for it to be harassment, if they're creating an environment that, and we use the buzzwords a lot, in fact I think they're in here somewhere, but we use the buzzwords intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. If the environment that is created by this person's actions is either intimidating, hostile, or offensive, it can be considered harassment. Whether they mean it to be or not, it can be considered harassment. And this is the one, accidents do happen. Now, I know for a fact that everybody in this room at some point has probably said something, whether it's sexual nature or whether it's just something that was probably not appropriate. But you say something and then you're going home going, why did I say that? I should have never said that. I've done it, and it's usually not sexual in nature, but it's something I shouldn't have said at some point. You have these slip-ups, these social blunders. You just need to learn from them. Realize that, you know what, when you think to yourself, I should have never said that, don't say it next time, or don't act inappropriately at the next time that comes up. And if it's an accident, it's not usually harassment, because if it's an accident, I mean, it's usually not severe. It's usually something you say or do that's inappropriate, but it's not as severe. I would hope it wouldn't be if it's an accident. And if you don't do it again, it usually won't constitute harassment. Some danger zones. Sexual advances, obviously, if you're in the danger zone, if you make unwelcome sexual advances towards a fellow employee, touch someone intimately or in a sexually suggestive manner, speak or write to someone, grab or hold someone forcibly, commit sexual assault or rape, obviously. Requests for sexual dangers. If you are in the danger zone, if you offer rewards in return for sexual favors, again, that's usually a supervisor, that quid pro quo. Threaten negative employment action if sexual favors aren't given, kind of the opposite. If you don't do this, I won't give it to you. And use the power of your position. So that's, again, all that supervisor quid pro quo. Other conduct. This is, should say conduct. Other conduct, if you're in the danger zone, if you share or discuss your sexual experiences in the office. This is that situation I mentioned. That person felt it was an opportune time. Everybody was listening. Let me tell you all about my sex life and what I do and what happened. And nobody wants to hear it. It's not appropriate. It's unprofessional. It's something that can offend people, and they can say it's creating that environment. Pressure coworkers for information about their personal experiences, pester someone repeatedly with requests for a date, give undue attention to someone, touch someone in the manner that might be perceived as sexual, or create a hostile and uncomfortable work environment. And these are things like the dirty jokes, the vulgar language, invading personal space. We've all heard jokes. We've all thought them or wanted to share something you heard that might be inappropriate at a certain time. But the problem is you don't know who's around, you don't know who's listening, you don't know what, and it's not appropriate in the workplace. If you are one of those people that hear a joke that you want to share, do it on your own personal time, not in the workplace. So, supervisor's responsibility. The supervisors really do have far more responsibility when it comes to this. Employees have a responsibility to control their own actions, but a supervisor has the responsibility to make sure that everybody knows that it's not accepted and won't be tolerated. They set the tone, hopefully. So they have to listen to what you have to say about a problem and follow up with the offender. If they hear of a harassment, follow the company's policy and procedures, and direct the person to direct it to the right person. It should not be ignored. As a supervisor, if there's supervisors in the room, it should not be ignored, because the last thing you want to do is on our investigative report where it says, did anybody know about this? You certainly don't want your name listed as a supervisor, because if you knew and didn't do anything about it, that's where it could come back, because we as a company are liable for not acting on something at that point. Harassment detrimentally affects the work environment because it decreases morale, prevents you from doing your job, and affects others from doing their jobs and costs the company money. The second one, where it talks about prevents you from doing your job, that is a big part what the courts look at when they look at hostile work environments. Because that's such a gray area, was it harassment, wasn't it harassment? Did it affect the employee's work performance? Did it affect them in a way that they couldn't continue to do their job? There's a lot of times where it looks like they have three options if they're sexually harassed, and that is they just continue to be harassed, they try to stand up to the person, which usually ends up getting worse, or two, they leave their job because they don't know what else to do. If those are their only three options, that means it's really affecting their work and they could lose their job, that's when it's a severe situation too that the courts look at. And it costs the company money. I mean, obviously, you could have people calling in because they don't want to deal with it. It's making them sick to come to work. So now you have absences that you need to fill with overtime, or you just have absences. Or there could be some form of litigation that would come that could cost the company money, depending what the courts rule. Participating in an investigation. I think many of you already know that what we do for an investigation, but all employees have a responsibility to cooperate with it. They vary from case to case. We do stress, highly stress, that it has to be kept confidential. They have to cooperate, there is no retaliation. In fact, we did have a case where we sat with both parties and said, this is confidential. We ask that you not discuss this with anybody outside the room. And within 2 days of having that discussion, it came back to me that the person was discussing it. Well, you know what? Even so, that person was brought back in and disciplined for discussing the case because it's a confidential situation. It shouldn't be discussed outside that room. So there could be discipline even after the fact if that is discussed. Answer questions completely. Follow up. We will follow up with the complainant and the alleged harasser to let them know what we determined. We do bring witnesses in. What typically happens is we get the complaint form, and for those of you who have been here for a while, you know Irene Terryberry usually stands up here and does this, and she has been our harassment investigator for quite some time now. She contacted me at the end of last year and said, you know what, she's going to fully retire, and although she still helps out at Heritage House from time to time, but she really felt bad. She's wonderful. She did a great job. But she really felt bad because she was starting to travel more to see her grandkids, and she didn't want to have to worry about whether she was going to be in town if something came up or not. With Heritage House, she could schedule it as she's in town or what, because she's only subbing and making herself available when they need her. For this, she felt bad because there were a couple cases that came up that she wasn't able to participate in. So the way that the policy is right now is all complaints do come into me, because then I will determine and we look at them. To be honest with you, we don't have a lot of sexual harassment claims that come in. We don't hardly have any sexual harassment claims, to be honest with you. We have hostile work environment, where people say somebody is creating an environment that's offensive, or somebody said something that offended me, or somebody called me a name, and that's harassing. And some of those cases, honestly, probably don't rise to the level of what an ongoing harassment investigation is. So each claim is going to be looked at on a case-by-case and determine, is this a discrimination against Title VII, like a race, a religion, gender? Is it going to be a discrimination based on that? Is it going to be a sexual harassment? Or is it going to be something a little bit more severe that we need to do a corporate thorough investigation? If that's the case, then I will get a team, myself, if available, and somebody else, or we have a couple people that we're training to assist with us. One from our retirement campus, because there's so few employees there that she is able to, Becky LeBaron's our administrator there, she doesn't know many of the people, so she's really neutral and third party, and she'll come in and do a great job investigating. And then one of our director of marketing is probably going to assist with that. So we'll have a team that gets together to do the investigations if that happens. If it's determined that it's not really a harassment situation, it's more of somebody called someone a name, and it's inappropriate, it's unprofessional, but it didn't rise to the level of that, we probably will turn it back to the facilities and say you need to handle this on a management level and do what you feel is necessary, or bring both parties in. That doesn't mean an investigation won't be done by them, but it might not constitute the full harassment, because usually when we do a harassment investigation like this, it could take more than a week to complete by the time that you get all the witnesses and everybody involved. And not that I mind doing that by any means, but some of them aren't as severe as some of the other ones that we get. So it's probably not even appropriate in that chain of command. But what we do then is we bring the person in. We do have a form that they have to complete, and we'll ask them questions. They have to fill that out. We'll sit down with them. We'll go over that so we get more information. And then we'll bring the person that they're saying is harassing them, the alleged harasser, and say, do you have a claim against you? And this is what they're saying. And then they have their opportunity to give us their side of the story, because there's always two sides to every story. So we'll meet with both of them, they'll talk to us, and both people can give us witnesses that might be able to tell us, this is what really happened, or this is what really happened. And literally most of the time it is a he said, she said kind of thing. So we have to sort through with witnesses or with what's going on in the units or department. So then we will get back, and that's where the follow-up is, just to the complainant and the alleged harasser. We do not get back to witnesses. Once they were interviewed or once they're done, they're done. They don't get involved in what the outcome is. We obviously won't share with them that somebody could or might have been disciplined or was disciplined or wasn't disciplined, whatever the case might be. But we do definitely do that with the two that are directly involved in the case. Preventing sexual harassment. So this is just some things to remember. So when you're at work, remember, avoid sexual humor, even if it just seems innocent to some of you, or that your friend, you guys talk or you share these stories or you say things. Someone else could be offended if they overhear it. You have family members and residents and other people that may not want to hear it as well. Avoid behavior that has sexual overtones. Avoid inappropriate touching. Better yet, avoid all touching. Keep work area decorated appropriately. No pictures or items that might be found offensive. Be sensitive to other employees. You may not find something offensive, but others might. Supervisors need to remember their responsibility. Ask yourself, this was one that we put in there last year that I really wanted to keep, because I think it's something just to consider. Would my behavior change if a member of my family were present? So if your spouse was standing behind you, would you be doing what you're doing at work that you're doing possibly now? Would I want someone in my family treated or spoken to in this manner? And report any incidents that may be considered harassment or offensive. We have had several times where people, I mentioned earlier, where somebody, the two girls that were offended by the resident's son that would come in and kind of invade their space, they didn't feel comfortable to come forward, but we had somebody else who came forward on their behalf. We've probably had that happen a handful of times in all the years we've been doing it, where somebody else said, I think this is wrong, and I think you should know what's going on. The person who was the victim didn't say anything, but the other people came forward. Every single time, I can remember every time the person in the end said thank you, because they were uncomfortable, they didn't like the behavior, but they didn't want to get involved in something. In the end, we try to make it so it's easy on everybody. We try to make it so that we can just stop the behavior. That's our goal. Our goal is not to discipline everybody, but our goal is to stop the behavior. So in the end, they were thankful that somebody came forward. Workplace bullies. I do want to spend just a few minutes. We've talked about this in the past, but I do want to spend a couple of minutes because it's not technically falls under workplace sexual harassment, and there are no court rulings on it right now, but you need to be careful because it's becoming a much hotter topic now than it was before. Some definitions that you can see, and gossip's in here, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Harass is to disturb persistently, to annoy others. Gossip, idle talk, especially about the affairs of others, to talk about others in a negative way, and to malign one's reputation. Well, if you are talking about others, and especially about their personal life in negative ways, isn't that sort of, and if you're doing it a lot, isn't that sort of to disturb persistently, like you're going after them, talking about them a lot? it could be hand in hand a little bit. What the definition of workplace bullying is, workplace bullying is repeated. We read that harassment is repeated if it's a hostile work environment. It's repeated health harming mistreatment of one or more persons, so the targets, they could target more than one person, by one or more perpetrators that takes one or more of the following forms. So verbal abuse, offensive conduct or behaviors, which are threatening, humiliating, or intimidating, very similar to the definition before of offensive conduct, and we use the words intimidating, hostile, or offensive. Well, intimidating, threatening could be hostile, so they're very similar in the words. Work interference, sabotage, which prevents work from getting done. That impacts someone's work performance. So many of the definitions of workplace bullying could be consistent with workplace harassment. Workplace bullying is driven by the perpetrator's need to control the targeted individuals. This is what the research has done so far. Usually it's initiated by bullies who choose their targets, timing, location, and methods, escalate to involve others who side with them. They try to get others to join them, either voluntarily or through coercion, and undermines legitimate business interests. Basically, they take their own personal agenda for whatever their issue is with the person, and they don't care about the work or what's happening. They only care about somehow making life miserable for their target people. So workplace bullying is becoming, I mean, you hear so much more about schools, and I think eventually workplace will start to come out even more as well. The other thing that we always talk about, and this I want to thank to Irene as well because she added this, was the office gossip. And I just really like these, so every year we do a reminder that office gossip is a gossip is one who talks to you about others, a bore is one who talks to you about himself, and a brilliant conversationalist is one who talks to you about yourself. So think about where you fall. Do you talk about yourself? Do you talk about others or whatnot? So you need to look at that. Then the other one says if it's untrue, unnecessary, or unkind, leave it unsaid. There's no point of starting gossip. I know it happens. I know the drama occurs and people say things, but where does it get anybody? Nowhere. Nowhere. So the golden rule that we always say is treat others as you would want them to be treated. If you wouldn't want your son or daughter or spouse to be harassed, why would you harass someone else? If you don't want someone to talk about you and how you are, then why would you talk about somebody else and how they are? So treat others as you would want them to be treated. Follow the golden rule. And then I just have the harassment complaints, the policy and procedure. If you have any complaints, they should now be sent to me, not Irene. That'll be changed on all the boards. And again, kind of the new thing is we'll review them carefully, and if it's determined that it is a management situation rather than a harassment claim, then the facilities will specifically deal with them in that situation. So, any questions? Half an hour, boy, I talk fast. It's pretty much the same thing, just be careful, be very careful. I can honestly tell you that when we call people in for saying that they've been harassed, most of the time they're surprised. They're really surprised that somebody would file a claim against them because they're not necessarily being so severe that they're touching someone or doing what you would consider to be sexual harassment. So be careful what you say and what you do. It can come back to